Alexander Pierce, a billionaire known for his sharp instincts and unforgiving standards, had always prided himself on one thing above all else: loyalty. In the high-stakes world of wealth and power, trust was a currency more valuable than gold, and betrayal could cost far more than money. Over the years, he had employed dozens of personal assistants, drivers, and household staff, many competent, some exceptional, but he had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Recently, Alexander had hired a new personal driver, an older man named Thomas. Thomas's resume was modest but sufficient, and his age suggested experience, yet Alexander couldn't shake a nagging feeling of doubt. Perhaps it was the way Thomas hesitated slightly when asked about past employment, or maybe it was the subtle desperation in his eyes during the interview. The man had even requested a small salary advance, a request that, in Alexander's mind, immediately raised red flags. A loyal driver should never need more than what was promised, yet here Thomas was, asking for something before proving his worth. Alexander spent days observing Thomas's behavior, noting small things: a frown when asked to run errands, a quick glance at his phone, a nervous tapping of the fingers while waiting. Nothing outright confirmed disloyalty, but instinct told Alexander that a true test was required. If loyalty was what mattered most, he needed to see it in action, under conditions that were unmissable and tempting. And so the plan was born. A test both simple and profound. Leave Thomas in a situation that would reveal his character without words. Alexander meticulously arranged it one crisp Thursday morning. He placed a sleek leather briefcase, unmistakably stuffed with stacks of cash, in the back seat of his luxury sedan. The briefcase was left wide open, as though forgotten in haste. The driver's eyes would fall upon it, the temptation clear and undeniable. "Drive me to the meeting downtown," Alexander instructed, maintaining a casual tone, though inside he was anything but relaxed. He had made the route complicated enough to give Thomas time alone with the briefcase, but straightforward enough that there would be no reason to stop along the way. He watched carefully as Thomas settled into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors, his hands brushing the steering wheel with a subtle tension. The older man nodded politely. "Of course, sir," he replied, his voice calm, betraying nothing of his thoughts. As the car rolled smoothly through the quiet morning streets, Alexander's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where the briefcase sat in plain view. It seemed to mock him, its contents glittering in the sunlight. He expected at any moment for Thomas's fingers to twitch, to explore, to commit the kind of small theft that would confirm his suspicions. Yet nothing happened. Thomas drove in perfect silence, hands steady, eyes forward, never once glancing at the money more than necessary to navigate the vehicle safely. Every turn, every stoplight, every acceleration was executed with meticulous precision. Alexander felt a mix of disbelief and irritation. Was the man simply clever enough to hide his intentions, or was something else at play? They arrived at the downtown office building where Alexander's meeting was scheduled. He stepped out, leaning casually against the car while observing Thomas. "You can wait here for 20 minutes, Alexander instructed. "Do not leave the vehicle, and ensure everything remains exactly as it is." Thomas nodded, his expression neutral. "Understood, sir." Alexander entered the building with a sense of anticipation, but also with an unusual flutter of doubt. Part of him feared that Thomas's silence was a performance, a calculated deception that would reveal itself eventually. He returned 2 hours later, the meeting concluded, expecting either relief or confirmation of his worst fears. The briefcase remained untouched. Every bill in its stack stayed exactly where he had placed them. Every envelope, every note, remained perfectly in order. Alexander stepped closer, leaning down to inspect the contents himself. His eyebrows lifted in disbelief. Had the man not touched a cent? Could this older, seemingly desperate driver truly be so incorruptible? As Thomas stepped down from the driver's seat, Alexander decided it was time to confront him, not with accusations, but with curiosity. "Thomas," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of skepticism and fascination, "did you consider taking any of it?" Thomas looked him directly in the eye, his expression calm and steady, though his hands were slightly calloused from years of hard work. "No, sir. Not even for a moment," he replied simply. Alexander's mind raced. He had expected hesitation, rationalization, excuses, but not this straightforward honesty. It was almost unbelievable, and yet, something about Thomas's demeanor suggested it was genuine. He waited, half expecting some twist, some hidden agenda, but nothing came. That evening, after the briefcase test, Alexander returned to the mansion, still unsure what to make of Thomas. The older man had performed flawlessly, yet the lingering question remained. Why? What drove this man to resist temptation so utterly, especially when he had seemed desperate enough to ask for an advance? As Alexander settled into his study, his phone buzzed. A message appeared, a single call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent, delivering news that would shatter every assumption he had ever held about loyalty, integrity, and the simple truth of human character. That night, Alexander sat in his study, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The day's events played repeatedly in his mind. Thomas's impeccable behavior had left him conflicted. How could a man in desperate need, one bold enough to ask for a salary advance, resist such a blatant temptation? Alexander had always believed that desperation could erode even the strongest principles, yet Thomas seemed immune. His phone buzzed again, this time with the same unknown number. Taking a deep breath, Alexander answered. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent, speaking in a tone that made Alexander lean forward in his chair. "Mr. Pierce," the caller began. "I'm calling regarding Thomas." Alexander's brow furrowed. "Yes, what about him?" "There's something you should know," the voice continued. "Thomas has been helping someone in the family quietly for years. It's remarkable, actually. He's been providing financial and emotional support without ever asking for recognition. He's been loyal in ways you've never imagined." Alexander's mind raced. Could this be true? The man he had quietly doubted, the man he had prepared a test for, had been far more loyal than even he could understand. "Explain," he said sharply, yet a hint of anticipation threaded his voice. "Thomas has been using his own modest savings to help several employees' families, even contributing anonymously to local charities tied to your company. And he's also supported his own adult children through college, paying tuition and living expenses quietly. He's sacrificed himself in countless ways to protect and uplift others, never once revealing it." Alexander sat back, stunned. The picture of desperation he had seen in the interview was not greed, it was responsibility. The small salary advance request suddenly made perfect sense. Thomas had been trying to manage obligations quietly, without involving anyone, without seeking sympathy or attention. The next morning, Alexander found himself walking through the garage where Thomas had parked his car. The leather briefcase test from the day before lingered in his mind, almost surreal in its simplicity and power. Thomas approached, holding a clipboard. "Good morning, sir," he said, his tone neutral, professional as always. Alexander stopped him mid-step. "Thomas, I need to talk to you." The older man raised an eyebrow, but remained calm. "Of course, sir." Alexander gestured for Thomas to sit. He found himself struggling for words. Loyalty, integrity, responsibility. Thomas had demonstrated all of these in ways Alexander had never expected. He finally exhaled. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I doubted you. I tested you. And I realize now that you've been one of the most loyal people I've ever met, in ways I didn't even know to measure." Thomas blinked, expression unreadable. "Sir, I only did what I thought was right." "Yes," Alexander said, nodding slowly. "But I failed to recognize it until now. You've gone above and beyond, quietly, without ever seeking credit. That is loyalty." For the first time, Thomas allowed a small smile. "Thank you, sir," he said simply. "That means more than you know." The day continued, but Alexander's perspective had shifted entirely. He watched Thomas move about the mansion, interacting with staff, organizing errands, managing schedules with quiet efficiency. Everything he observed now carried new meaning. Thomas wasn't just a driver. He was a man of principle, unshakable character, and remarkable dedication. Later that evening, Alexander called his assistant. "Schedule a meeting," he said. "I want to review Thomas's history, his contributions, everything." As documents arrived and the truth unfolded, Alexander was left in awe. Every act of quiet generosity, every sacrifice, every decision made without recognition painted a picture of a man whose moral compass was unerring. The briefcase test, once intended to expose a flaw, had inadvertently revealed a hero. And then came the moment that truly stunned Alexander. A phone call from one of the employees Thomas had quietly assisted. "I just wanted to let you know," the voice said. "Thomas has helped save my family." We never knew it came from him directly, but the impact was enormous. He changed our lives. Alexander realized that loyalty wasn't just about following orders or avoiding temptation. True loyalty was about selfless dedication, about acting with integrity even when no one was watching. Thomas had passed the ultimate test, not the one Alexander had devised, but the one life had presented every day. That night, as Alexander sat alone, he reflected on everything he thought he knew about people, loyalty, and trust. He had been ready to suspect, ready to condemn, but Thomas had shown him something far greater. A quiet, unassuming man had reminded him that true character was revealed not in grand gestures, but in consistent, selfless action. Alexander knew that things were about to change, not just in his understanding of Thomas, but in the way he would approach relationships, trust, and leadership from that moment forward. The next morning, Alexander woke with a sense of anticipation. He had spent the previous evening reflecting on Thomas's unwavering integrity, and he knew it was time to confront the final piece of the puzzle. The truth Thomas had quietly carried for years was about to surface in a way Alexander had never imagined. He found Thomas in the garage, polishing the luxury sedan with careful, methodical strokes. "Thomas," Alexander called, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. "I've learned a lot these past few days, but there's still one thing I don't understand. Why?" Thomas straightened, setting the cloth aside. "Why what, sir? Why risk so much, every day for others? Your integrity, your loyalty, it goes beyond duty. You could have taken shortcuts, avoided responsibility, kept money or favors for yourself. Yet you didn't. Why?" Thomas's eyes softened, his voice low but steady. "Because someone once did the same for me, sir. My mother. She believed in doing right even when no one is watching. She taught me that integrity isn't about reward or recognition. It's about who you are when no one can see. Everything I've done, every bit of help I've given, I did because I remembered her lessons." Alexander was struck silent. The man he had doubted, the man he had tested with the briefcase, had lived a life of principles so profound that it had quietly shaped the lives of everyone around him. But the true revelation came moments later, when Thomas handed Alexander an envelope. "Sir," Thomas said, "this was meant for you. Only if you ever question my loyalty. I didn't think it would be necessary." Alexander opened it carefully. Inside were documents detailing Thomas's years of quiet contributions, financial support for struggling staff families, discreet charitable donations under the company's name, and personal sacrifices that went unnoticed by everyone, including Alexander himself. There were letters from employees, testimonials of gratitude, and even statements proving that Thomas had personally covered educational expenses for his own children to ensure they had a future. Alexander's eyes widened in disbelief. The man he had suspected, the man he had quietly tested, had done far more than any test could reveal. Every act of kindness, every sacrifice, every unheralded gesture painted the portrait of a man whose moral compass was impeccable. And then, the phone rang again. This time, it was Samuel, one of the employees Thomas had helped years before. "Mr. Pierce," Samuel said, voice trembling with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you, or rather, Thomas. I never knew how much he did for my family. He changed our lives. We're alive today because of him." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. The truth was undeniable. Loyalty, integrity, and compassion could quietly change the world, even when unnoticed. Thomas had passed a test Alexander didn't even know existed, one far beyond the reach of money, power, or authority. Later that day, Alexander called his staff together for a private meeting. "I want you all to know someone very special among us," he began. "Thomas has shown us all what true loyalty looks like. His dedication, his selflessness, and his integrity are unmatched. Today, we acknowledge him, not for a single act, but for a lifetime of quiet, unwavering honesty." Thomas, usually reserved, allowed a modest smile to grace his face. The recognition wasn't what mattered. He had never sought it, but seeing the appreciation from Alexander and the staff brought a warmth he had rarely felt. That evening, Alexander sat alone in his study, reflecting on the lessons learned. He realized that true wealth wasn't measured in money or possessions. It was measured in trust, loyalty, and the quiet goodness that people carried in their hearts. Thomas had reminded him that the greatest value in life wasn't what one could take, but what one could give, and that integrity, once proven, could leave a lasting mark on everyone around. The briefcase test, once designed to expose dishonesty, had instead revealed a man of extraordinary character. And Alexander knew that from that day forward, he would never underestimate the power of a quiet, selfless act, and he would never again doubt the measure of a person's loyalty.